I'd like to discuss strategy behind the pawn structure, and the position in front of yourself is taken from one of my students' games, and the last played move is bishop b4, from f8 to b4, and I think it's a very interesting moment to stop and think about this move. Like, what I would be thinking here as white is, why would black like to trade the dark square bishop, since they have light square pawns? When you have light square pawns, normally you'd like to keep the dark square bishop, because that's the way to keep the dark squares under your control. You know, when you have light square pawns, they're all controlling only light squares, and the dark squares may be vulnerable. So when you go with the bishop to b4, you're kind of showing an intention to maybe get this bishop traded for the knight and double the opponent's pawns. What may be a possible reason for one to want to do that? One that I can think of is that black wants to just create double pawns in the black's formation. Other than that, maybe to cause some problems on c3, in a sense that they can play maybe queen a5 after, and maybe knight e4. So this is the only, I would say, dangerous thing that white is maybe going to face here. If white manages to prevent this kind of problems on c3, then the bishop's placement is not going to be optimal here on b4. Actually, it would be much better to have that bishop on e7, breaking the pin. Quite unpleasant one, I would say. So overall, we can say that the bishop b4 can be played only in case there is going to be a serious pressure on c3. And if it's not that, if that's not going to happen, then the bishop is just misplaced, and this whole move is actually bad. But we didn't say anything yet about doubling the pawns. Maybe that's the reason. Maybe that's the thing that is also good for black. And I'm saying it's not. And it's not because of what? Let's see what would you do leading white's pieces, having these double pawns already there on the c file. Like, is that a problem for white? Is it going to be a problem to undouble at any moment? Well, the answer is no, because you can actually easily just take on d5, which you don't need to. You can do that at any moment. You don't need to rush, because if you do that, like say too soon, it may result in opening the black's c8 bishop, light square bishop, that is also suffering here. Also suffering along with the dark squares of black. So what I'm saying is that the bishop's placement on b4 probably is bad, because even if they capture here, they're gonna achieve nothing except of losing the control of the dark squares. The doubling of the white c pawns is not gonna be like permanent. It's gonna stay there for some time, but at some point white is going to just get rid of at least one of those two pawns easily, because black has pawn on d5. And I'm stressing that because normally when black goes to with the bishop to b4 and takes on c3, they would like to have the c pawn to c5, not the d pawn on the 5th rank. The d pawn stays on either d6 or d7. And the idea behind pushing the c pawn and not the d pawn of black is that, well, white is not going to be able to undouble. I mean, there is no way to take on d5 if there is no d pawn on d7 pawn on d5 at that point. So the bishop goes to b4 when there is no pawn on d5. Now this is not fully correct to say. Sometimes you do play bishop b4 and there is something good behind it, but in this given position, most likely that's not going to happen. In a sense that there is no clear way to exploit this pin. And if there is nothing like exploitation of that pin, then the bishop's best place would be actually e7. Now, who would be willing to go to b4 with the bishop and then go back to e7? That's someone who actually wants to lose the tempo. Overall, we had bishop b4 in the game, and we'll now continue seeing what a student of mine played as white and how actually we can treat the situation as white. We can play queen b3. That was playing the game, attacking the bishop, asking black what you're going to do with it. Now if you take, I can also take with the queen, avoiding even this problem of having double pawns, which is not that big of a, not that that much of a problem at all. But we had instead actually bishop back to e7. Now this may be also some strategy of black, like going to b4, maybe provoking queen b3, and then going back to e7 saying, you know what, your queen is not standing well here on b3 square. Which I cannot really fully agree with, because the queen on b3 is doing something. It's not a perfect spot for the queen. She would be maybe happier on c2, but she's at least defending the c4 pawn. She's putting pressure on b7. She also, which is very important, I think, she also abandoned d1 square, which means that the rook can come there, which also is a typical idea of white in the queen's gambit. Now, why would one want to have rook on d1? It's normally because it's really a long story, but overall, look at the bishop on c8. That's a terrible, the worst piece that black can have in the queen's gambit declined. And it's related with the white's rook standing on a1 and coming to d1. How it is related with it? Well, if black is intending to get his bishop active, it's going to happen through either e5 eventually or c5, getting somehow these pawns of light squares moving away from the light squares and freeing some space for the light square bishop, of course. Now, how this rook on d1 is going to be useful in that case, or these cases of black pushing either e5 or c5? Well, it's going to be eyeing the black's queen, you see, on the d8. So that's why I like to play with the queen on c2 or b3, I mean, that's also fine. And having my rook on d1 is one of the crucial things for me in the queen's gambit as white. Okay, let's not go too deep into this. White played e3 here. Why not? I mean, rook d1 is also fine, but it can be played later. There is no really danger of black playing either e5 or c5 yet. We had queen b6 of black, and this is like offering this trade of queens is not that tempting for white. Not really tempting for white to accept. Because what do we get from this capture on b6? Well, it's only the a file of black getting more, getting open for the rook to be active there. And why would we help black that way? And maybe you're asking, well, at least white is gonna create double pawns for black in the black's camp. But that's not gonna be a big issue because black has also the second pawn next to them, and it's gonna be like creating a mass of pawns that is not going to be seen as a weakness. There is no pawn that can be easily attacked and seriously put pressure against. Now, that's why I like the idea of my student here played queen c2. Playing queen c2 means that you know what, you had now your queen on b6. You got your queen on b6, but is that queen well placed there? That's a good question now. What the queen is doing there? Like, not really that she's not doing anything, but maybe she's on some other piece's way. Like, for example, again, thinking of this bishop's development eventually, and let's say that there is no e5, easy e5, nor easy c5, you'd like to have probably the bishop on b7. You know, that means the b pawn needs to move, but now the queen is standing there. So that may be actually a problem that they just created to their own position, playing queen b6. And that's why, again, queen c2 is a good move, I would say. Black played knight bd7. Okay, that's not something to criticize. Bishop d3. Well, maybe I would criticize bishop d3 a little, because I would favor probably rook d1 again, because I'm waiting for black to capture, and I'm going to be playing this bishop takes c4 in one move. So, for example, if we'd be playing bishop d3 and they take on c4 and we capture there, of course, we'd get this kind of position. But how about playing rook d1 here? And after d takes c, playing bishop takes c4 in one move. So it's the same position, only we have rook on a better place, d1. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that black would just take on c4 the moment we play rook d1. That's not going to happen. That wouldn't happen. Instead we would have actually after rook d1 probably black castling here, and then after we play bishop d3, then they can take on c4. So they can just wait a little, and that's it. So that's why I'm not going to criticize bishop d3. And indeed, black took on c4, we got bishop takes c4, and then queen c7. So black is kind of admitting that the queen's placement of the b6 was not really optimal. Going back to c7 is, I would say, a good idea. a good idea because of a plan of freeing up a little bit black's pieces, getting more space, acting against the white center, and that is all related with the black's idea pushing. That all basically means that black is about to push e5. Well, either e5 or c5, most likely e5. And the queen is supporting it. Okay, white castles, and then we had bishop d6. Now this is maybe something I wouldn't choose that move, I guess, because it's opening some things like bishop takes knight at some point, and then if this knight is not going to be there or is about to be, let's say, moving, then this is always a threat, like damaging the black's pawn structure, most likely next to the black's king. So I don't like it. And for another reason why I don't like that move is that they already developed it. They actually played twice already with the same bishop. Now it's the third move in only 11 moves. Third move with the same piece. Already developed piece, of course. Now, white played e4, which is a logical decision. I mean, okay, there is something that I would add here. I would add normally a perspective to the situation, in a sense that I'm thinking black is about to just push e5, and I need to prepare myself for this e5. And I don't know if e4 is the best way to prepare my own position for it. And I'm guessing that maybe having a rook on d1 again, expecting the d file to become open, well, black plays e5 next, then maybe that works better for me than having a pawn on e4, you see. But okay, e4 cannot be wrong from the perspective of like a really simple perspective like this. Like we castled, we developed our minor pieces, we also moved our queen away from the d1, and next thing to do is grab more space. Let's get these pawns moving in the center. Of course, we'd like to do that eventually. So there is nothing on the first sight at least wrong with this e4. And also e4 is threatening fork, but kind of provoking e5 really heavily. Okay, h6 played, and then I was actually watching this game while it was, you know, on and online, and I was thinking, what would I do here as white? What can be done that is good? And I was thinking, and I was going deep into thinking, like, what's going to happen after bishop h4 or bishop e3, and then knight g4 is there, like a problem for white. So most likely bishop h4. And then e5, things like that. And then suddenly my student played this bishop takes f6, and I was like stunned, you know, how couldn't I see that? Bishop f6 is actually a very good move. Because the thing is now, if black captures back with a knight, we get e5, simple as that, just fork and win. So black needs to play g takes f. Now one can be thinking like, well, why would this be so good for white, since black gets this g file and I am now in trouble on the g file? My king is going to be easily under pressure, put under pressure, and that may seem logical and really scary at first, but we need to take into account a couple of other things. Like one of those is that we never played, first of all, any bad move. We did everything like according to the main principles, you know, of chess. We developed, we grabbed space, grabbed a lot of space in the center control. Didn't play with the same piece twice or three times, at least, like, unless it was like really necessary, like with the queen that we wanted to put back on c2, or the bishop taking on f6. So there was nothing like that, or the bishop from d3 to c4, but that was forced. So there was no mistake, I would say, made by white so far. And white's king's position is not compromised. You know, there is nothing that looks like weakening, like weakened place on the king's side and next to the white's king. So it doesn't seem like we have any weakness in the position, and we are finished with development. Well, black, when you look at it, the king standing in the center, the damaged pawn structure, the bishop standing on c8, and the rook, of course, trapped on a8, having less space as well, not having control over the center. Those are all elements that are going against black. And when you see that the opponent is actually without these elements supporting their attacking chances, let's say, that is like consisted of an open file and potential of getting something there, then you don't need to be worried about your position. Your king is safe. You're supposed to be safe then. Now, of course, if you don't do something right after that and you start making mistakes, you may lose, but you should feel confident at that point because you did everything and you have everything on the right place. Problem now is actually what to do next. And I saw my student actually play this move rook fe1, and I was kind of surprised by it, because there is nothing that much concrete to do after that. Like what is the plan behind rook fe1? Is he planning to push e5? But is that pawn actually hanging there? F takes c, d takes c, knight takes c5, knight takes c5, bishop takes c5, and we are losing that pawn. So why would one want to play this move, rook e1? Well, I think it's really an excellent move, actually, when I think about it now. It's basically a move that makes black think that they cannot move anything because e5 is coming. So they're right there where they should supposed to be with their pieces in order to prevent e5. But they also want to move away these pieces, and they cannot do that because e5 is coming. And by having the pawn on e5, we're gonna not only expose a little bit more their king, but also it's gonna open some new places on the board, in the center of the board, for our pieces, like a knight coming to e4. Beautiful post for the knight after that. Not to mention harassing the bishop. The bishop needs to move, decentralizing further, and so on. And that's exactly what we had here. Black couldn't really stand keeping the pieces like that, and we had knight b6. Okay, the bishop moves back to b3. That's a good idea, I think, keeping the bishop on this diagonal. If in case black castles, that would be nice, although having bishop on d3 is also fine. And also the bishop from here is kind of restricting the knight, because of these squares being controlled by the bishop. Got bishop d7, black is trying to catch up in development. And then it looks also like black is about to castle long, running away from the g-file being open, running away from the weak pawns here, and trying to go for an attack, an active game on the g-file. And that's why we got a4. So very good move here, a very good move because it's provoking black to, well, play a5, because if they would castle long, we get a5, and that forces knight to a8. I hope you can see that the rook is not standing on a8 at that point, because it castled before that. And the knight on a8 would be really a terrible piece. I mean, that must be a bad situation for black. And the knight cannot even go back into the play, because the c7 square is taken by the queen, which cannot really move except to going to b8. I mean, I hope you can see, or if you're not seeing, let me play it out actually here, and after knight a8. See, the queen needs to move in order for the knight to come out, and that means the queen needs to go to b8 in order for the knight to come to c7, which is really ridiculous. Okay, so it looks like a4 is a very good decision by white because it forces a5, which is going to be seen as a weakness in case black goes and castles long. And now, since the knight is not standing anymore on d7, it went from d7 to b6, 3 moves before, well then white can push e5 and free up the e4 square for their knight. So f takes c, d takes c, and bishop b4. So this is a good, reasonable thing to do, because the knight wanted to go to e4. Now it cannot because the rook is hanging. Although I was actually there, like, watching the game online, and I was thinking, why not again? Maybe knight e4 is still good. We get f6, we get maybe knight e6 check and ruining their castling possibilities. But maybe it's too risky. We have already a very good position, definitely better. And then we are suddenly risking something, giving away material. Maybe that's not a clever decision. But there is another one, like knight b5, hitting the queen, and this pawn is pinned, it cannot take it. So plenty of interesting moves. I would say with the knight, at least, you have at least a couple of those. But a student of mine actually played rook ac1, which is also a very interesting decision here, because it is having like a hidden agenda, because after castling long you get knight b5. You can play knight b5 actually, because the pawn is still pinned, although the king's standing on c8. But now it's even worse because they get checkmated. I hope you can see it. So let's say they castle, which actually happened in the game, knight b5, which wasn't really the decision of my student, but it could be like leading to a checkmate in case black takes. And there it is. Of course, black wouldn't take it. Black would probably play queen b8, but that looks really bad for black. Plus the knight can stay on b5. Instead we had rook e d1. Again, a surprising move for me, but it is really clever, I think. The knight is now free to move. And we got the d file also. So it's a very, very subtle decision here. I'm not saying it's the best. Again, knight b5 maybe was better. But it is subtle move. And then we had bishop takes knight. I think black was really scared of knight b5 or knight e4. And then queen takes c3. But now look at it. Look at the situation of black. Having the pawn on a5 weaken. The queen is attacking it already. Having the d6 weakness, a square. And we mentioned it on the beginning of this video. Black was going with the bishop from f8 to b4 and move, what was that? Move 5, I believe. And weakening the dark squares. Now the d6 square is a weakness. It eventually turns out important. But that's why we had knight d5. Black is trying to basically cover it with a knight. Nothing can happen now to come to d6. And then bishop takes d5. This was actually really well seen by my student. And after e takes d5, thanks to the pin, we get rook takes d5. So all that pressure, all that excellent positional game played, like done by white, resulted in winning material. This is what is happening normally when you play a good game. You're just trying to improve and improve more and more, and punishing your opponent's mistakes. Like a couple of those, I believe, in this up to this point, and you are eventually getting material advantage. That's exactly what we had here. So bishop e6, black cannot really hold cannot hold this pawn. I mean, b6 is further weakening, heavily weakening their position. I believe we just get knight e4 in. The pawn is pinned still, and it's a really terrible situation for black. Plus the rook can also end up on d6, paralyzing the bishop. But because if it goes here, you just take on c6. Well, okay. Instead we had bishop e6. Black wants to play actively, and then rook takes a5. Rook takes the second pawn, threatening maybe rook a8. It may be, yeah, it may be actually really dangerous because king d7. Then we have some checks and so on. But then we had king b8, and suddenly we need to be careful. This rook can end up trapped, you know, because b6 is there, and then bishop c8, things like that. We need to be careful, and that then again, I was really happy seeing my student playing rook c5. Because that's the way to improve that rook, going back to c5, to back to the center almost, and then freeing up the pawn to go to a6 and thus undermine the pawn on c6 and basically eventually capture it. So very good decision. Rook h g8. Okay, black is trying to generate some attacking chances on the king side, and finally b4. I was thinking maybe a5 was better. And I still don't know what is better, actually. b4 also is a reasonable thing because we are threatening b5 and undermining the c6 just the other way, and that's it. Okay, b4, bishop f5. I don't know, maybe there is a better move than this for black. Because, you know, we were threatening b5 and they didn't do anything about it. So here we have knight d4 also with a tempo on the bishop. That's exactly what was done in the game. Bishop e4 and then f3. Again, a very nice decision because it's not easy to move your pawns in front of your king, especially when the king of the opponent is on the other side of the board. But it was a good decision based on good calculation. The bishop went back to d5 and then b5. So continuing with the plan, black played rook g6, basically protecting the pawn. And then a5. I was not too happy with this move, but okay. Position is much better, so you know you can afford playing maybe not that accurately. Queen d7 and then e6. This was actually a practical decision by my student. I actually heard him saying after the game actually that he wanted to secure his position a little bit better, and also cut off the rooks, you see, influence to the c6 pawn. And after that, of course, b takes c, b takes c, oh, actually bishop takes c6, knight takes c6, b takes c6, rook takes c6, and this is completely winning endgame, not because only having so many extra pawns, I think, how many? 2 of those extra pawns, but also black's king's position is terrible. So I think that's the motive for black here. That was the motive for black to force trade of queens, queen d4. I think that was the best here. Otherwise, black gets checkmated. But this rook endgame is completely hopeless. And you'll see that soon after, black got checkmated, which of course is not something that was necessary. I mean, here by black, for example, black could defend their position with, I don't know, holding the 7th rank, preventing rook b7, followed by rook c8 mate. But instead, black I guess wanted to go for like maybe allowing white to finish the game in a nice manner, rook b7, and after that black decided to resign. I mean, even with a better way of playing here, I guess rook d7 or rook g7, you still get a situation that is not really I mean, playable. It's just lost. So we saw an interesting opening related with the pawn structure strategy, a mistake, or let's say just inaccuracy by black playing this move. You see at this point bishop b4. I would say it's supposed to be called inaccuracy without understanding the structure and the needs behind it. After that, we saw also some very interesting moves like this one at this point, queen b6, queen c2, avoiding to trade. This is a difficult decision to make. Maybe that's the best move in the game, in this whole game. It's not that often that I see someone actually rejecting a trade offer like that. But just thinking that the opponent's queen is not standing on a good spot. She needs to move again, losing time. After that, we saw like really precise way of playing and precision, and also good intuition. Rook fe1 was a very good intuitive move. And further, we saw also very nice moves, but I think this game was played on a very high level, which I anyway used to actually create a little demonstration of some basic, like more or less basic, but also intermediate instructive points, and I think it was useful for you to see. Thank you for watching.